Have you ever seen a show or read a book where it doesn't seem like the plot is actually going anywhere, or that the writer doesn't really have anything in mind, and perhaps even that the characters themselves hardly ever change, but they're still fun to follow and watch? This is the crux of why I think characters are more important than plot and always will be. Because you can have a story without a plot, but you can never have a story without characters. A plot can generally be the same between two stories, but if the characters are poorly written in one and masterfully written in the other, then the story is still good in the latter. That's not to say that a well-written plot is not still important. In fact, it really is important. Having a good idea of what you want to tell, when you want to tell it, and why you're telling it in the first place is still necessary for most stories. What needs to be recognized, however, is that a good plot is not always necessarily going to have a good story. It can be useful, but if you want to ensure that you're always going to be making a good story no matter what, then you should develop your fundamental skills towards writing characters first. Characters can help you with world building and lay the foundation for a plot down the road. Not every story starts with a plot line. Some stories are just the characters living their lives, and that can be pretty fun in and of itself. Episodic storytelling is neither better nor worse than plot-based storytelling. A story does not need to delve into some intricate and deep, complex lore in order to improve. Sometimes adding complexity can actually make the story worse, not better. And plot-based storytelling is not a bad thing either. It has its strengths and weaknesses and should be recognized as such. If your reader is expecting and wanting episodic storytelling, then why not continue to write in an episodic format? If you as a writer want to branch out into more plot-heavy areas, then you should also understand what you lose when you do that. Plot-based stories lose the ability to start wherever they please. Plot-based stories tend to lose the sense of self-containment per episode, where each part of the series feels like its own individual story. Episodic storytelling benefits from the viewer or reader being able to pick up the story from any point and know what's going on, whereas plot-based storytelling is great for leading audiences through a long adventure, but requires that the audience is there from the beginning. Plot-based storytelling is also very good for helping you to build and develop characters in a way that you otherwise would not be able to do in an episodic format. Whether your story is episodic or plot-based, though, characters will always be the most important aspect of that story. It is the characters who display the plot and push it forward. They are the ones who react to the events of your world. Characters are the lens for which we view that story, and if that lens is out of focus or shoddy, then the rest looks out of focus and shoddy. Adventure Time is a good example of a story that was not originally plot-based. A lot of it was episodic, and it really didn't need to branch out into a plot-based, lore-heavy type of show, although it did. However, I think that there are some fans of Adventure Time who felt that there was something lost when they branched into that. On the opposite side of the coin, I also feel like there's a lot of people who think that just because you delve into deep lore and a plot-based storyline, that it is inherently superior writing to that of an episodic one. And as I mentioned before, episodic storytelling has its own strengths. It allows people to jump in wherever they want, but it doesn't mean that one is more superior than the other just because one has advantages and disadvantages where the other one does not. And while some people may prefer more plot-based storytelling, I also think that there are people who also prefer more episodic storytelling. Regardless though, between either type of storytelling, your characters are going to be the ones carrying that in the first place. And if those characters are not well written or compelling or interesting to watch, then it doesn't matter what format you're going to tell your story in, because nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to get invested in plot points, but everybody is going to get invested in a character who experiences those plot points. With my own writing, I came to understand this fairly early on. I realized that instead of building a world and a deep lore and a backstory and an origin for the creation of the world and all these other mythologies and blah, 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 that it was actually just a lot better for me to start with the characters of my story. And yes, world building can be important. However, it's not always necessary, and sometimes it can get in the way of actually telling your story. There is not much good to lore if there are not characters to explore and display that lore for the audience. And while lore can make an interesting YouTube video for many creators, it does not always make an interesting story for writers. Speaking from my own experience, I recall having an idea of how the world came to be and how it was created by gods and dragons and all these other things. And then when I actually got down to what I knew about my story, I really didn't have anything. I didn't have any characters to introduce all of this intricate lore, and when I did have characters, they were only mouthpieces to convey that lore that I found so interesting. The problem with that, though, is that nobody else would find that interesting. And when you begin to center your writing on your characters, it becomes a lot more efficient for you as a writer. Instead of building out the entire world before you, you use the characters as an opportunity to only render in what's directly around them, and to keep everything veiled in a fog of war. This means a lot less time writing about stuff that nobody's ever going to read, and more time exploring ideas and concepts and storylines that are compelling and interesting not only for the viewer, but also for you as the writer. Take advantage of your characters when you're writing them. Try to think about who they are, where they're from, who they're related to, and why. And when you can make a compelling character who is motivated and drives the story forward, writing the world around them becomes that much easier. But in the end, this is just my opinion, and I know that writing has a lot of different ways that people can do it. So I'm actually interested to see what you guys think about this topic. Maybe you have an argument for why it's actually the other way around and why it might be a little bit different. Let me know in the comments section below. But with that being said, you will never write an important character unless you do the most important thing, and that is to open up a document and start writing.